Joined this morning by David Davis, the former Brexit Secretary. I've been talking to the listeners about the fact we're going to get blue passports back with European Union not written on it, and I think that's quite good news. Tell us first, before we come to Huawei and your strong article in today's Mail on Sunday, how is Brexit going, David?
It's going fine. We knew that, right from the beginning, you and I have discussed this, right from the beginning, we knew that there'd be a lot of bluster out of the European Union, and we're getting that right now. But at the end of the day, the facts will out. The facts support our case. You hear them talking about, you've got to do this and that and the other to have access to the single market. And the answer is, okay, well, you've got to do things for us to have access to our market because it's bigger than yours, that sort of thing. So it's going okay. Boris has done the right thing in setting an absolute timetable. That's important, not flinching on it. He and his spokesman have done the right thing saying we're taking back control. That means we are deciding our laws, not you or European Union. And at the end of the day, I think the European Union will come to its senses. Frankly, if it doesn't, then we'll win that battle. If they want to have an economic battle, we'll win it. Because we've got a stronger economy than they have.
Isn't it remarkable? It's just 3 weeks ago that, 31st of January, and big celebrations for some, and for others, acceptance. Whether it's Tony Blair or Alistair Campbell or, I'm not sure Adonis has quite got there yet, but most people have. Poor chap won't even use a 50p coin, so he looks a bit like the Flat Earth Society. Because actually, it's very interesting, isn't it? The level of acceptance that it's happened, and we must try and make the best of this. When you look back, the last 3.5 years were pretty extraordinary, weren't they?
Yeah, they're quite hard work, I have to say.
Well, you resigned.
Yeah. Well, there are those, including Boris himself, who said to me, well, actually today it was all triggered by your resignation, the change of leadership and God knows what else. And they're probably right in that respect. But, the one thing I think that I completely mispredicted or didn't predict was the sort of ongoing stubborn, boneheaded resistance of people to the people's decision, to the Remainers. That was the thing none of us calculated for, I think. And what that did, of course, was undermine the country's negotiating position, made the Europeans think that they could have their cake and eat it, to use a phrase, and that they could, we could keep paying, they could keep giving us instructions, but somehow we pretend we had Brexit. All those things have now dissolved. And one of the things I was never ever really worried about this threat of a second referendum. And the reason I was never worried is going around the country, of course, I had people coming up to me on public transport and so on, and very often, about 1 in 4 of them, 3 in 4 were Brexiteers saying, when we're going to get it done, Mr. Davis, but 1 in 4 were Remainers who said, look, we made a decision. Let's not mess around. I'm getting sick and tired of it. 1 or 2 Remainers saying, actually, given the way the European Union's behaved, I've changed my mind.
And yet you saw that going around the country. I certainly saw it going around the country. A lot of people in Westminster just refused to believe it. But hey, we're through it. But and of course, with politics, just because there's been a famous victory won for somebody like you who campaign hard for Brexit, there are fresh challenges. And I have to say, the piece that you've written in today's Mail on Sunday, China has spied on us for decades, stealing on an industrial scale. If you can interfere with 5G, you have the power to bring the UK to a halt. And the most devastating line of all, you say yourself, it's the worst security blunder since MI6 hired Philby, Blunt and Burgess. You're not mucking about on this, are you?
Well, no. This is a matter of national security. There is no higher importance in terms of the decisions that the government makes and the Prime Minister makes. And the Prime Minister is the minister who is primarily the first minister responsible for national security. That's why MI6 and MI5 and the Chiefs of Defence Staff have direct access to him. So it's a very important decision for Boris. Now, to be fair to him, he was handed a bit of a hospital pass because we started taking on Huawei back with 3G, back in the Blair years. And nobody objected then. And people were asleep at the switch through all of this. Now, 3G is bad enough, 4G is worse, but 5G is going to underpin every aspect of our lives, ranging from our entertainment. You'd be able to download a film in, I don't know, 15 or 20 seconds, right through to our medical records, our traffic lights, our electricity, all our utilities. All of that's going to be under the control of the 5G system. So if you're inside it, then you have a grip on the country that no foreign nation, not even an ally, should have, let alone somebody who might be opposed to us. Now, the interesting thing here, I mean, there's been lots of stuff in the papers about Trump and Trump's attitude to this, all right? Some people, maybe reasonably, say, well, this is a battle for global dominance between America and China, and they're just annoyed that we're, as it were, on the wrong side of that argument. That's not the biggest issue, although I would say we should be on the side of democracy, not the totalitarian state, but by the by. The biggest issue for me is the Australian reaction to this. Now, you can't accuse Australia of that. Australia just the opposite. 40% of their exports go to China. They are very sensitive to not offending the Chinese government. And their equivalent of GCHQ did the right thing. They sat down and said, now, if we were the Chinese and we had this control of the 5G network, or this involvement in the 5G network of another country, how much damage could we do? And could we be stopped? And the answers to those two questions were a hell of a lot of damage, almost infinite amounts of damage, both in terms of interference and also surveillance. But also, we couldn't be stopped. There'd be no way to stop us now. That for me was the most. When I saw that, that was it. As far as I was concerned, this was a wrong decision, and we have to resist it.
Now, Boris Johnson, when Boris Johnson is questioned on this, he gives firstly a technical answer about the core and the periphery, and I let's not go down there
it's
because
wrong, but
no one understands this stuff. But what he said was, and this is interesting, he said, what's the alternative? And David Davis, what is the alternative to Huawei being involved with our 5G network?
Well, the first alternative is the existing companies. I mean, there's a lot of black propaganda out there. I mean, Huawei spends a lot of money on PR, which tells you that Nokia and Ericsson and Samsung are not as good as Huawei. Well, these things, they're like mobile phones. One day one's in the lead and the next day the other's in the lead, and it's backwards and forwards, whether it's Apple or Samsung or whoever, and it's just the same. Today Huawei have got some technical advantages which would help Vodafone in London, but Ericsson have got the fastest systems in the world at the moment. The fastest 5G in the world, actual working 5G, is in America, which has got no Huawei in it at all. But other countries have done different things. Japan, also very conscious of China, is now investing. The state is giving cheap loans and tax breaks to companies developing 5G technology. Vietnam, for heaven's sake, Vietnam is creating its own 5G technology and using Nokia meanwhile. So the answer is immediately use Nokia, Ericsson, Samsung, and in the longer run, develop some proprietary technology which we are sure of. Because even the Western technologies have got bits of made in the Far East technology in it, the bits of Chinese tech here and everywhere. So to be absolutely sure, we should actually be able to have it all made in a democracy, basically.
No, I'm with you on this, and I'm back to DC tomorrow. Yeah. I'll be in America next week, and I've got some some big meetings with Republican senators, congressmen, and I was there 2 weeks ago, and I was just amazed by the strength of feeling. I mean, even Nancy Pelosi.
I say not just Republicans.
No, absolutely. Even Nancy Pelosi. So right at the moment, I see just about zero chance of a trade deal, or even the beginnings of a trade deal, going through Congress, and that worries me because that's important for us, and it's important with our Brussels negotiations. Obviously worries about the 5G. Just explain 5G to people if they haven't really heard of it properly.
What 5G? Well,
yeah,
it just stands for fifth generation, and the techie bit you're talking about is it will be about 10 to 100 times faster than 4G. Depends on where you are. It uses different bandwidths. And different ones are different speeds. The so-called millimetre bandwidths are very, very, very fast indeed. That's where the world record is held, but only operates over short distances. So it's a very complex network, mesh, if you like. Some people have got mesh Wi-Fi in their homes. It's a bit like that. A mesh of interacting intelligent nodes all around the country. So that's how it works. And it's going to be incredibly fast, and it's going to be used for everything. I mean, I'm a bit older than you. At some point or other, I'll probably have some medical condition or other. The future way of managing that, I'll have some sort of monitor. It might be a heart monitor or insulin monitor or whatever on me, which will broadcast to my base station at home, which will broadcast back to my GP. Things like that will become made possible by 5G.
It's not fourth gear to fifth gear in a car. It's a really big step change.
It's like going from an old Ford to a Ferrari.
And that's important for everyone to take on board. Now, look, if so much is at threat, and even Mark Esper, the US Defence Secretary, is suggesting that NATO may have a real problem. Intelligence sharing is a real problem. Trade deals are a real problem. And as you quite rightly say, not just the Americans, the Australians and others feeling the same way. What chance is there of getting Boris Johnson to change his mind on this?
Well, I think a reasonable chance. Obviously, some people have just given up because they think the decision's made. But look who's engaged in this. You've got people like ranging from Ian Duncan Smith through to Damian Green. This again, it's a bit like Pelosi. It's not just one part of the party that's engaged in this. When Green and I both asked questions of Boris in PMQs a week or so ago, when I came out, every single person agreed with me. Not just normally you have one or two who say, "Oh, good question." Everybody said, "You're dead right." Not even it's just "You're dead right." Ordinary people in the street think the same, and it's a very, very big issue. So I think there's that. The second thing in this is not just the effect of Parliament, where they'll have trouble getting legislation through on this, but also the impact. Not just NATO, Five Eyes. Just so your listeners know, Five Eyes is basically America, Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. It's the sort of inner club of the best intelligence services or best democratic intelligence services in the world, and they operate very, very closely with each other. We've got spy network, surveillance networks across the world, and some people describe it as the NATO of the cyber age, because that's where the cyber war is fought. Now, China will have a success if we go with Huawei, if it fractures the Five Eyes. And it will fracture the Five Eyes. It'll damage the cooperation. So that thing must be front and centre in Boris's mind.
So will you vote against the government on this?
If it comes down to it, yes, I will.
OK. Your chance to quiz David Davis on YouTube. Direct questions coming from Henry. Why doesn't David Davis trust our own security services, who Boris says have deemed the use of Huawei safe? Because
the two equivalents of GCHQ, the NSA, the American NSA, is much bigger than our operation, and they've said it's dangerous. But much more powerfully for me, the Australian Signals Intelligence Directorate, who know the Chinese very well, are very careful about offending them, but have gone through this operation of actually proving it out and working out what their tactics would be, what the counter-tactics would be.
No, I get that, David, but Henry's question is, why doesn't David Davis trust our own security
Well, because they make
services?
mistakes, as they have in the past. I mean, I picked Philby and McLean because it's a very famous mistake, but it's not the only one. And our job as accountable politicians is to challenge the agencies and challenge what the advice given. Now, the advice we know, some of the advice was there is no back door. Right, that's what was said by. Well, actually, the Americans then came along and said, actually, there is a back door, and we told you about it. And then the Germans said, yes, they did. So everybody else is marching one way. Who's out of step? I'm afraid on this one, it's us out of step.
Yeah, I mean, there are two issues there, aren't there? One is technical, and what can and can't be done, and who's right and who's wrong. But the other is political. And I would say to Henry that whatever advice we got from GCHQ, or whoever it may be, the political risk of doing this is alienating our best friends in the world, and that, I think, is absolutely crazy. Let's get Liam on the phone from Liverpool. Good morning, Liam.
Morning, Nigel. Morning, David.
Morning, Liam.
My question is, how much of this is a political game and a diplomatic one from the government and from Boris, whereby we have not thrown the Chinese out by getting rid of Huawei. We keep them on side, or he keeps them on side, knows he doesn't get the legislation through, holds his hands up, says, sorry guys, I wanted to keep you guys in, but I can't go with 5G. But let's carry on building HS2.
I don't think that's likely, Liam, because the government doesn't want to start its new golden uplands with a defeat in the Commons. That's the last thing governments go for. But I do think you got a point that the driving force behind this decision is trying to keep China on side. There's no doubt China's a huge economic. It's a bear in the room. It's the elephant in the room, really, in the modern economy. And you will remember the Cameron Osborne government moved heaven and earth to be nice to China over and over and over again for exactly that reason, the sort of economic fear, if you like. So I can understand the motivation, but the truth is there comes a point when the security of your country is at stake. You've just got to stand up.
OK, thank you, and thank you, Liam. And David, I have to say, it is your party, isn't it, that very happy to get the Chinese involved in our nuclear industry for an astonishing sum of money. We've got British Steel, where for some reason it appears to be the Chinese bid that is favoured. Are there elements of the great and the good in this country who are now effectively in the pay of the Chinese?
Well, I don't know about it being in the pay of the Chinese, but I think they all have this view. We've heard lots of arguments in the last week or so about the so-called impartiality of the civil service. Sometimes what they describe as impartial is just simply the conventional wisdom of metropolitan London. And the conventional wisdom of metropolitan London is you've got to be nice to China, bluntly, and that even when you complain about Hong Kong, you do it in terribly polite terms. Well, the Chinese invented the word kowtow. And it's not a very good tactic for dealing with big, tough, bullying countries, no matter who they are.
No.
And so I take the view that it's. But there is one other thing I'd say about in the payoff. No, I don't think the civil service is in the payoff. But when they retire.
Well, yeah, and I've noticed some very senior civil servants sitting on Huawei's advisory board.
Exactly. They either on their advisory board or working for their PR companies and so on. I have to say, I would be a bit loath to approve some of the appointments. They're supposed to go through an approval process. I would have been a bit loath to approve those processes. But you're right. They spend a lot of money on PR, a lot of money on buying up retired civil servants, very senior civil servants.
It must have an impact.
And I think it may have an impact.
David, let's move on. I've got a great question here from Nikki, who texts in and says, I have a question for David. How could Boris get out of the Chinese deal and save face at the same time? That's a very good question.
Well, if Boris were asking me that question, what I'd say to him, look, somebody actually needs to take a grip of this worldwide, not just here. And truth be told, Donald Trump is probably not it. He's a big, powerful man, and there are arguments about how good he is as president of America. I think he's better than he's given credit for. But you need somebody who can actually stand up and pull everybody else together. Pull the Japanese in, even the Vietnamese in, pull all the other Five Eyes in. And I think actually Britain's got a very good role. We just had Brexit. We are now standing tall in the world, one hopes. This is one area where we could stand tall. And he could actually switch on this completely and say, actually, I've thought about this, I've looked hard at the advice, and I want to actually make sure not just Britain, but all of the Five Eyes. Last week, Mr. Barr, the Attorney General of the USA, said, why doesn't the States take controlling interests in Nokia and Ericsson? Now, I don't think the Swedes...
That's not going to happen.
I don't think the Swedes and the Finns would agree with that.
No.
But then there's an argument of saying that all the Five Eyes between them should control the intellectual property, should control the designs and so on, and make sure it's in our... So he could get credit for that.
And if all of this, David, was to delay the full implementation of 5G, what would your answer to that be?
A big deal, frankly. There are those who argue that it's already going to cost BT 500 million, and there's going to delay it by a year or two. Well, you know what? If we have to spend 1% of the cost of HS2 on avoiding a massive threat to national security, so be it. If we have to delay having much faster video for a year, so be it. And by the way, the delay is not a permanent delay. You know, I buy an iPhone every few years, right? I buy my iPhone 3 years ago, and I bought a new one this year, right? The advantage of waiting a year is you leapfrog the old technology. So, going in a year later may actually end up with a better outcome.
And they're cheaper too, aren't they?
And they're cheaper too. Exactly.
Which is a good point. Let's go to Audrey, who's calling from Southend-on-Sea. Audrey, good morning.
Hello there.
Good
Hi.
morning. Please
Good morning.
fire away.
Well, my concern is why are we putting trade with other countries at risk for one technology company?
Well, you mean with the States?
Yes, because, we're off on our own now from the EU, and we need to be able to go to people like Australia, America.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, and it is. I mean, I think actually it's the third biggest problem. The first one is as national security. The second is breaking up Five Eyes. The third one is, you're dead right, is risk to trade. Now, I guess in Whitehall, the civil servants and the agencies saying, well, we get more trade. We will get more trade with China, and less with the States. I don't agree with that. The trade with the States comes with no strings attached, and that's very important.
Okay, Audrey, thank you very much. I'm going to take one more question. Paul from Stoke-on-Trent. Good morning, Paul.
Hello, Nigel. Hello, David as well. Yeah.
Hi,
the question I want to ask the question is, are you against the idea about 5G? And why are you against it, David?
Okay, what, 5G as a technology?
Yeah, are you against it, the idea, or are you just...
No, not at all. I mean,
are you against the idea?
No, it's look, 5G is inevitable. It's going to happen. The only question is when. Whether it's immediately or in a year's time or 2 years' time. And you don't need to have Huawei to have 5G. Understand this. The Australians decided in 2018 not to allow Huawei in. They have already got 5G in Sydney and Melbourne using Nokia and Ericsson. This is the nonsense. So no, this is not a question about whether or not to have 5G. It's a question of whether or not to have 5G, which is run by somebody who might be an enemy of your country.
Okay, Paul, thank you. And David, we spoke to Bob Seeley last week, and Bob was, again, like you, very, very firm on this. He made a very interesting point. That at no time since 2003, when Huawei first got involved in this country, had there been a proper debate in Parliament on this issue. Is there going to be legislation on this going through the House of Commons? And if so, what is the time frame here?
Well, there will have to be legislation, either primary or secondary. We don't know the time frame. I mean, one of the reasons I've raised this issue today is because it could start next week. Or the week after. And I think it's important that we have the debate both inside Parliament but also outside Parliament. I mean, the response I'm getting to this everywhere, inside Parliament, on the streets, is universally, what on earth is the government doing?
I think we're picking this up with our callers here too. And now, what about if the Chinese were to build HS2 for us and do it quickly at half the price? Would you be opposed to that?
I don't care. That's fine. I don't worry me. I mean,
Okay.
I wouldn't have HS2, but HS2 is an old technology. HS2 is yesterday. 5G is tomorrow.
And finally, we've even seen Jeremy Corbyn visiting South Wales. We don't know.
I thought for a second you said he'd been on your programme.
No. Although we had Charlie Faulkner on last week, and we do get Alistair Campbell come. We do. Adonis comes on. Goodness knows why. So we do get Labour figures on, not Jeremy. But I just saw the weather map earlier on. Another torrent of rain heading towards us tomorrow. And Boris hasn't been to visit anybody, should he?
If I were advising him, probably yes. I'd say yes. But that's the politics, not the substance. I think the thing that he may well be doing is sitting down and thinking very, very hard about our flood management. And the simple truth is that we have, in the last few decades, lost a lot of. I'm a rural MP, right? Lost a lot of the understanding, not the high-tech understanding, the local knowledge of how drainage works, of what ditches and dikes and rivers you have to keep dredged and so on. We have dissipated the responsibility for it. It used to be the National Rivers Authority. Now it's the Environment Agency, who've got 3 or 4 other things to worry about. So there's quite a lot of thought process needs to go into that. There's also, I think, and I would argue a lot of money to be spent on it. You know, if we spent 100 billion on HS2, I think we could spend at least half that.
Well, there we are. The anti-HS2 dig never far away.
We could spend at least half that on river protection, flood defences, proper drainage, getting farmers to take sacrificial flooding, paying them for it. We can do that post-Brexit.
Yeah.
So there are a whole series of things that need to be done. And so I'm not worried about the theatre. I am worried about the outcome.
David, thanks ever so much for coming in this morning.